Do the Maple Leafs need to prioritize getting Matthew Knies signed before July 1? What would that contract look like? And does a Stanley Cup help or hurt McDavid's odds of coming home? You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric show hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. What's happening, pal? How you feeling on a Tuesday?
Feeling pretty good. Maybe a little salty in the fact that we got a Stanley Cup final coming up and it does not feature the Leafs.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're not used to this by now, buddy?
Yeah, I'm getting tired of it. I don't want to be talking about a Leafs game.
Yeah, it would be nice. Would be nice. But, well, you know, maybe next year. Maybe next year is the year it's done, right? We're finally going to see some change, we think, possibly, this offseason, and we'll see if that does end up resulting in a championship at some point. Actually, I've got a take for you a little bit later on that has to do with the Stanley Cup final, with Connor McDavid, maybe being a Toronto Maple Leaf next year. So just sit tight, because we will get to that discussion in a little bit. But I want to talk about Matthew Knies to start things off today. And I believe that he is certainly, he's quickly becoming a fan favorite here in Toronto. The way that he plays, the style in which he plays, the tenacity, his give a bleep meter is off the charts. He's a goal scorer. He'll muck it up. He'll drop the mix, right? He'll throw knuckles, and he's really becoming such a beloved player here in Toronto. And he's got that, quote, DNA, I think, that Brad Treliving craves, right? Like, if you could take his DNA and make about 8 more Matthew Knieses, I'm sure Brad Treliving would love to do that. He's got a contract up for renewal this offseason, though, so he needs to get paid. Is there a threat, you think, that if he doesn't get an extension in place by July 1st, that he could be at the tippy top of a lot of GM's bucket list when they go shopping for RFAs this summer? Because it does feel as though GMs are more willing than ever before to actually utilize offer sheets this year.
Yeah, no, I don't. It's hard not to think that way, because after what St. Louis did when they got Holloway and Broberg, it's tough. It's tough to always get good young talent, and teams will say, well, yeah, draft capital is important, but Matthew Knies, being a 22-year-old, already established himself as a top line forward in the NHL. You will definitely pay the price it will take, even if you have to give up draft capital, to go and get a player like that. If I'm a GM, he'd be my number one target if I was to look to do an offer sheet.
Yeah, for sure. Like, there's a lot of good players out there, don't get me wrong, but like, just the way that this guy plays, he's a unicorn. He's a unicorn in the Maple Leafs lineup, and would be in a lot of lineups out there around the NHL. It's interesting that you said, like, the problem is for the Maple Leafs is like, there's a lot of heavy lifting that could be done between now and July 1st. You obviously have the pending unrestricted free agents and the 2 top boys in Mitch Marner and John Tavares. Like, I am curious if how much thought do you think Brad Treliving is giving into those 2 players in comparison to Matthew Knies? Like, when you talk about, the agents and how often he's chatting with agents, like, how much is he talking to Knies' agent compared to Marner and Tavares' agent? Like, what's the ranking and priority there leading up to July 1, you think?
I think Knies has got to be, if he's not at 1, he's at 2. Like, he understands how, the thought earlier was the Leafs have some time maybe to figure this out and they'll get to Knies' contract. But Brad Treliving made it seem like, no, I want to get this one done.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Tavares to me is on the low end. because Tavares has made known he wants to stay. So the Leafs shouldn't feel any pressure to try to get that one done. Knies, the reason why that one should get done is because you got to know what you have with him so you can take care of it. Like, we're not talking about a third line or, guy here. We're talking about a top line player who's going to command more than probably what we thought he was going to command last year. We had a feeling what he could have gotten or what he could be, but now that it's actually here, the Leafs want to get this one done. That way you have a better idea of what else you need to do or what you have to work with in terms of your salary cap.
Right. So, it's going to be an interesting next few weeks. I hope we start to hear about, some of the legwork being done. I saw the Philadelphia Flyers. They made sure that they got their 2 RFAs that they didn't want anyone to be able to talk to, got them locked up in Tyson Forster and Noah Cates. But there was an interesting signing, though, also, that just really as an aside. We'll get back to Matthew Knies in a sec. Or actually, maybe we'll talk about it later. You talk about John Tavares. There's kind of an interesting signing that happened around the NHL with Yanni Gourde and the Tampa Bay Lightning that may be the type of structure we could see the Maple Leafs go with a John Tavares to try and make things work. Let's talk about that a little bit later on. But I've got a good player comparable for Matthew Knies. I've got a pretty good sense of what that contract could look like, maybe should look like based on a player comp that I've got that I think works beautifully. So why don't we take a quick break? We'll come back. I'll get to the player comp, what I think Matthew Knies' next contract should look like for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Also got that contract breakdown for John Tavares. And I've got that take, Dave. I think McDavid needs to win the Stanley Cup, and I think it'll bring him closer to Toronto. I'll explain my thoughts on that next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
Today's edition of Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you feeling fuller longer. And look, if you love to have pistachios, but you're not a fan of the mess that comes with them, then go and get the no-shell variety. That's one of the great features of Wonderful Pistachios. They're good for whether you're working at your desk, going on a road trip, or you just need a quick protein boost. It's always a go-to for a lot of people. And if you want some different flavors, Wonderful Pistachios got many different ones that you can try out. So make sure you go to wonderfulpistachios.com, get snackin and crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you, as we are each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, on the Locked On Leafs podcast, which is free and available wherever you find your podcasts, and also up on YouTube. Just a reminder, we do go all the way through the playoffs, in through the off season, all summer long. So make sure that you're subscribed to the Locked On Leafs podcast for that daily dose of Maple Leafs content. All right, we're talking about Matthew Knies and what his next contract could look like. Before I give you my player comparable and my thoughts on what an extension could or should look like for Matthew Knies, have you given much thought into what that next deal could or should look like, Dave?
I have. I've been kind of looking at, comparables of players, looking at deals that are recently signed. We know that this also, what's the bridge option look like, what the long-term option looks like. So that kind of wider ranging idea for sure.
So that's interesting. And that's definitely notable. Like what do you think the Maple Leafs would prefer, long-term or bridge?
Long-term. Brad Chilliwack made it clear he wants long-term with this guy.
But you think Knies might push for a bridge?
No, I think the only way a bridge maybe would be the option is if Knies is coming out with I want 8 or 9 million, and the Leafs are like, we were kind of hoping for a 6, maybe 7. Now that doesn't seem like a big gap, right, in terms of but sometimes it's really hard to get to that middle ground. And so teams will just like, okay, we'll do what would it look like if we did a 2 or 3 year deal? And that's usually like it's similar to almost like the Matthew Kachuk.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody brought that comparison up to me, and I'm like, but there's a difference. Like Matthew Kachuk did not want to sign long term in Calgary. He never wanted to be in that market long term. Matthew Knies wants to be here. So I think that to me makes it a little different, but I think that's the only way I can see a bridge happening is that both sides are just way too far apart, and they're just like, you know what, let's do the 2 years, and we'll come back to this in a few years, which I don't agree with doing, by the way.
No, I would prefer he gets signed to a long-term deal because I think Matthew Knies is a budding star. I think he'll be a big part of this team moving forward. Like he will make up part of the new core four, right? He'll be the leading the charge in trying to change the DNA of this group. They'll try and get more guys who are wired like Knies in the mix here. So I'm with you. I think Matthew Knies and Brad Treliving said, just like you mentioned, he wants Knies to be here. He wants to try and get something done as soon as possible and try and get something done long term. Now, you mentioned that if Knies wants, somewhere in the 8-9 million range, that could be too much on a long term deal. I would push back on that because when I'm looking up player comparables, like he's got a case to garner that big of an ask if he's getting a long term deal. Because the more money or the more years you take up of a player, the more they can ask for, right? Because you're taking up unrestricted free agent seasons and you're taking them away from free agency for those years where they can make it big. So that's typically how contracts work. I believe that if you want to try and get Matthew Knies locked into an 8-year deal, it's going to cost you at least $8 million. That's of my belief. So if you want to get that done and sign it to a long-term extension, 8 years, the maximum, I think it's going to cost you something with an 8 in it. And the player comparable that I found as to why I think that this is kind of a perfect comparison as to why he would be worth that $8 million is Matthew Boldy. I think Matt Boldy is a great player comparable. You look at them; they both were college players, right? Power forwards, similar stature, similar build, similar ages when they come into the league, right? You look at their first seasons. Matthew Knies, first year, 15 goals, 35 points in total, right? Matt Boldy had a very similar first season. He had actually had a better first season realistically. He had a full year, but he had 27 goals and 73 points. Sorry, I apologize. I'm looking at this past season. He had a very similar first year with Minnesota. 15 goals, 24 assists for 39 points. So a very similar year. And then a very similar jump in the second year where Matthew Knies, year 2, 29 goals, 29 assists for 58 points. Matt Boldy, 31 goals, 32 assists for 63 points in a full 81 game season, whereas Knies played 78. So it almost points per game, goals per game is very on par with each other. They're both made that big jump from year 1 to year 2 to being 30 goal power forwards, and they're both similar age. I believe that this would be maybe the best player comparable in the NHL. And that Dave, when you look at Matt Boldy's contract that he signed this a couple of years ago, and it was a contract at 7 years at $7 million, which equals $49 million in total. But as you and I both know, players and agents don't look at the total number. They don't look at the average annual salary, right? The cap number, like a lot of people look at, like us. They look at the percentage of cap. In today's modern NHL, negotiations are always centered around the percentage of cap. And that's kind of how you battle for inflation and a rising cap structure. Yep. So Matt Boldy at $49 million at the time the deal was signed was 8.38% of the cap. If the Maple Leafs are to sign Matthew Knies this upcoming season, this summer, to a contract that is worth 8.38% of the cap, which is going up to $95.5 million, you're looking at $8.0029 million. So basically $8 million flat would be the exact type of percentages that you're looking at when you try and get the same amount that Matt Boldy got. And I would think that is kind of the perfect little comparable there for Matthew Knies and the Maple Leafs to kind of settle in on.
Yeah, I think the important thing here too is the longer you get this signed, the better off you're going to be. You look at there's a lot. That's how a lot of teams have been getting these contracts done, and then in a few years, people are going to say, "Well, Matthew Knies at $8 million is a steal based on the cap going up, and what other players in and around him are going to eventually get." Right next year, it's going to be an even bigger jump, and that's why getting this contract done now versus kicking it down the road, it's not going to get cheaper if you hold off and signing a long-term deal. Get it done now before the even bigger salary cap jump happens.
Right.
So I think like Matt Boldy was the play. When I was doing kind of looking around, he was kind of a good comparable for Knies, and because like Knies is like there are not many players like Matthew Knies in the NHL, right? Yeah. And that's why that's probably a really good comparable. Actually, I was going to look at one other player just to kind of, because it's not more so the type of player, it's more so the type of player he is versus his production. Like I look at Brady Tkachuk. Now I'm not saying they're totally the same player, but they're similar traits. Tkachuk, when he signed his deal, it was like 8.2 million is the cap hit over how many years? 7 years. Right?
Yeah. Let me see what the percentage of the cap was. 10.2% of the cap.
Yeah.
So you're only at $9.5 million, basically. So what you're gonna look at that point. 9.5 times 0.0 10, basically 0.10. 10%, 10.22.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had $9.7 million. Yeah,
like
you're at $9.7 million if you were to give him the Tkachuk extension.
Like if we feel like Matthew Knies is going to get to that level, because like him and Tkachuk aren't too far. Like Tkachuk is a more productive player offensively, right?
There's a much larger body of work with Tkachuk, though. Like, this is a player who came in right from day one, scored 20 goals in the NHL, right? There was a much better track record from college, right? His prospects, like that's the thing when you look at Matthew Knies, right? Like this year is almost, and this is where you do, I'm sure if you are Brad Treliving, you have to be just a little bit, wary of giving him the deal that he's asking for, just like willy-nilly, because this was a bit of an anomaly year, right? 29 goal season, 58 points. Those are career highs, not just in the NHL, but also he's never scored 29 goals in a hockey season. Like you go all the way back to his junior days in the USHL, he had a career high of 17 goals in junior in the USHL, right? When he was playing in college at the University of Minnesota, great player. He was a finalist for the Hobey Baker Award. He only had 21 goals in his final season at the University of Minnesota, and that was a career high in his collegiate year. So 29 goals is a little bit of an anomaly. And granted, he is a player who has definitely, like, he's a late bloomer, right? And we knew that the second he was drafted, and that was one of the things that I remember listening to the press conference afterwards and listening to Kyle Dubas and the scouts talk about Knies, and they discussed, hey, his post-Christmas and playoff play, that's where we fell in love with this kid, right? Like there was an injury there when he was with the Tri-City Storm. He wasn't quite himself, but then once he figured things out, he had a monstrous back half of the year. He had a really good playoff, and that's why they loved him and took him in the second round when he was ranked a little bit lower than that. And he obviously has shattered through those expectations and has continued to ascend. So, you could look at it and say, this year was an anomaly, but it also is like, well, maybe this is just him continuing to raise his floor, right? Like his ceiling and his floor at the same time, where he could be a 30-30 guy for the rest of his career. And 30-30 players who have that type of build and that type of gumption, had 5 goals in 13 playoff games for your team, was second on the team in scoring, had a couple big goals too throughout the playoffs, there is certainly an argument to be made that this is more so who he is. That being said, there's not that track record that there was with Kachuk to really gamble and have a lot of information and be so sure to push the chips in on a Kachuk at 10% of the cap, which is why I think Boldy is probably more so the comparable there.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I do think, like, look, Kachuk had a more prestige when he was a 4th overall pick, right? There's a little more prestige to that than there was to Matthew Knies, who was a 2nd round pick. So that's also something you have to factor in as well.
Right. But we'll see. We'll see what Brad Treliving can cook up. I think that the right numbers to come in. Let's just get it done. 8 by 8. I would even take 8 by 8.5. That's where I think the sweet spot is. If he signs the full 8-year term, I'd be willing to give him something that starts with an 8, all the way up to like 8.5. So low 8s, low to mid 8s is where I think an 8-year deal lands. If you take somewhere in the range of like 4 to 6 years, you're probably looking at something in the 7s. If it's a 2 or 3 year deal, probably something in the 6s is probably where it looks, what it'll look like for me, at least when it comes to getting Matthew Knies signed to an extension. But I think 8 by 8, 8 by 8.5 is about right for a Matthew Knies moving forward. But we'll see. Hopefully this happens soon and we can jump on here and talk about it and break it all down. On the other side, what could a contract extension look like for John Tavares? There was a brand new deal signed yesterday that might point to the type of structure that the Leafs will be looking at to try and get Tavares under contract. So we'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as usual. Appreciate the everydayers who have returned and are with us every single day listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast on your favorite podcast provider or up on YouTube. If you are an everydayer, you have not yet subscribed to the podcast, please do so. That'd be greatly appreciated. Really, really helps with our numbers too when we have more subscribers. So that would be greatly appreciated. And let us know down below. Comments also help. Let us know down below your thoughts on today's show and let us know what you think Matthew Knies and his next contract should look like, or John Tavares, because he also is due for an extension. And it's less contentious trying to get Tavares re-signed than it is Mitch Marner. There's definitely less controversy with bringing back Tavares as there is Marner. That being said, it has to be at the right number. Right, Dave? Like it has to be at a super team discount in order for the Maple Leafs to really consider that.
Yeah, especially because look at his age. He is not getting any younger. We know that his role is going to change. Again, he had a very productive year. This is why I'm not totally for getting rid of a player who had 38 goals last year. Like,
he'll be 35 by the time the season starts next year, by the way.
Yeah, he'll be 35. So, yes, that's why when some people like, I understand the desire to not go heavily into a player who is, getting older, but at the same time, at 34, he still had 74 points, 75 games, and 38 goals, and he had, I think, a better defensive year too. He showed strides defensively with Craig Berube, played more than he had done the last 2 years with Sheldon Keefe. So I think those things are like he hasn't totally. Like, I'm not saying the decline's not totally there yet, but it eventually will come.
Yeah, it's gonna come at some point, right? Like it always does. Father Time comes knocking. Eventually we will see that happen. Hopefully it's not this year, especially if they do decide to sign him to a long-term extension or extension of any kind. Hopefully that doesn't happen this season. But I am curious, like what the number is that you would be comfortable with if we, woke up tomorrow to an extension. Like, what are you hoping that term and dollar looks like?
I would go no more than No more than 3 years. 2 to 3 years is the term I'm looking at here. And cap wise, I think 5 is the max.
So,
but even then, that's only to like that. Even then, I'm still not totally comfortable. Like, my preference is 4. Like, give him 4, but I think it's going to take a little more.
So you think he's only worth about $4 million? That's where you got him.
That's to me. If they got him at $4 million the next few years, I'll be totally happy.
Okay, so an interesting contract was signed the other day by the Tampa Bay Lightning. Yanni Gourde, who they reacquired last year at the deadline from Seattle, and had a pretty good, final few weeks there for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He kind of struggled, had just 17 points in 36 games this year for Seattle, and then got traded, and he had 14 points in 21 games for 0.67 points per game once he went back to Tampa Bay. So definitely a much better situation for him once he got to Tampa. He is also a bit of an older player, 33 years old. He just signed a 6-year deal with the Tampa Bay Lightning at 33 years old. Now, Chris Tanev signed a very similar contract as well last year with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So it's not even like you have to also look that far and look that wide across the league to find another contract that had a very long term on an older player. But what I think is interesting about this Gourde one is in order to bring the cap hit to a number that Tampa wanted it to be at, they gave him extra term. Like, he probably was looking to get a total lump sum money in the range. Like, this contract he signed was for $14 million. So he probably was sitting here thinking, I want $14 million, right? Whether you want to stretch it across 4, 5, 6 years, whatever, I don't care. But that's got to be my final number, right? And that's where I think Tavares, you look at it, and he might say the same thing. He says, look, I want to make $20 million. Whether you want to stretch that across 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 possibly years, you decide how you want to do that, but that's the number that I'm looking at. If I can secure an extra 20 sheets in the bag, in the bank, I'm happy. And I think I can still give good solid 2-3 years of prime hockey. Maybe it's only another year or two after that where, I'm a fourth line player, similar to what Joe Thornton gave you at that point in his career. But if you can do that, all right, cool. So 5 years, 20 million, that's $4 million a season, right? If you want to give him a 6-year deal at $20 million, all right, well, let's find out. What's 20 divided by 6? Boom, you're looking at a contract of $3.33 million AAV stretched over 6 years. So that's more so, I think, what we could see with Tavares, where he gives you a number, and then if you're the Maple Leafs, you can kind of stretch it over time, right? Doesn't mean he has to play the full 6 years and play into his 40s. But I think it just helps both teams, right? John gets the number he wants, and the Leafs are able to buy down the cap and leave a little bit of space for the depth to acquire other talent. So that's where I think we'll end up. If the Leafs do bring back Tavares, which I'm still not 100% sold that it's going to happen, to be clear, but if they do, it's going to be on Toronto's terms, and I think that's kind of how it's going to have to work.
I don't totally hate the idea. I know some people will, but I also think where Tavares, I think where the Leafs are going to go to Tavares is that, look, we want to have you back, but it's going to have to work better for us cap wise.
100%.
I didn't think about the 6-year option because I wasn't sure if the Leafs would want to do that, because Tampa's done that so many times, and then they get into the situation where they can't keep everybody.
Yeah,
but I guess it's a little different for the Leafs because really the Leafs don't have as many. The only holes the Leafs have are up front. Maybe they want to tinker with the defense a little bit, but they got their whole blue lines locked up.
Yeah, the thing with Tampa though is like they did it with their core players
Yeah,
in their prime. So
true.
like they weren't like those numbers were going up, not down,
Yeah.
right? Like the
Yeah.
more term the more term you gave people, the higher the cap hit got, right? Whether it was McDonough, Stamkos, Kucherov, Vasilevsky, like the Sergachev, Sorelli, right? It's not as though the more years we give you, the less you're going to make or the less cap hit it's going to be. Whereas that is the case once you get to players who are into their 30s, right? At this point. And look, Tavares, right? Like if you can get him at 3.3 million or 4 million, whatever it is, if you could stretch it over the course of 5-6 years and get that cap hit down a bit, that leaves you more space to actually go in and get a second line center. And now all of a sudden, Tavares is your 3C, right? Or you can kick him out to the wing and properly fill that second line center role at some point and have the money and space to do so, right? Whereas when he's making the 11 million he's doing now, there's no way you could possibly do that. Or if you sign him at 6-7 million over the course of a 2 or 3 year deal, there's really no way to do that. He's going to have to be a top 6 contributor at that point. But at 3 million, takes a little bit of burden off of him because they can go out and get a guy who can replace that role.
See, hearing you say this is where I feel like the compromise can truly happen. You can make Tavares happy with him wanting to be here long term, and you can certainly make the Leafs front office happy to keep him because it's coming in at a manageable number. Because even at the 3 point,
like if he were to sign, right? Like let's say
let's say 3.5,
just
even let's say 3.5
sure.
million.
3.5 million, yeah.
With the way that the cap is going, that's going to look like pennies on the it's going to look like nothing in a few years. And look, how many players have we seen get to a point where it's like, yeah, I can't play, like not able to play anymore, and they just find a way of, okay, right off to the sunset.
Right.
So this would if let's say you did like a 5 or 6 year deal, you're taking this till he's in to 40.
Basically, what you're doing here, and again, there is a perfect player comparable actually for like this exact ask of about 21 mil. Like last year, Steven Stamkos, right? Which is a very similar situation. He could have stayed in Tampa if he would have taken 7x3, which still would have got him the $20 million deal, $21 million deal. He ultimately got by signing 3 years at 21 million for a $7 million AAV in Nashville. He's got his money. He's going to get it within 3 years. And Tavares, if he's willing to stretch it from a 3 years at 21 million or whatever to 6 years at 21 million, then that's how you get to that 3.5. But that's the way that Tavares comes back to Toronto. It's not by, signing a 2-3 year deal at what would be considered probably a fair number of 5-6 million a year. That's probably what he'd be worth over the next 2 years, but that's probably not going to work for the Leafs. And that's why I think that the term structure probably makes a lot more sense for JT.
Yeah, and I think Stamkos was. I still think Stamkos had a bad taste in his mouth when he wasn't made a priority to get his contract situation done before the year, and he had to constantly talk about it. I think that also led to his split. I think Tavares is he's at a point where he doesn't care about going and playing somewhere else. I think he truly just wants to stay here and he already made that move once. I don't think he wants to do it again with the young family. Stamkos was comfortable doing it. I think he kind of regrets it, considering how that first season went in Nashville. I mean, there's always a time for him to bounce and turn things around. But if you're John Tavares and if you're his agent, you look at that as a bit of a cautionary tale.
Yeah. But a couple of fascinating decisions for Brad Treliving ahead, and somehow we went the entire day without talking about the Mitch Marner saga, which is kind of impressive for a 35-minute only Maple Leafs podcast. So I think we deserve a little pat on the back for not having a Marner chat here today. But there is a Marner chat and a discussion to be had. We could get into it tomorrow or possibly later in the week, but we talk about Tavares making concessions to stay in Toronto. If Marner makes concessions, there's an argument to keep him as well. I've got a theory and a thought. I'm starting to soften on my letting Marner walk thought process. I know. And later in the week, I think tomorrow we're probably going to go heavy in previewing the Stanley Cup final
boy.
because it starts up tomorrow. But I think Thursday, I think I'm going. I'm still toying with the thought, but I think I'll be ready to come through with it by Thursday. So make sure you return to the podcast tomorrow, obviously, every day, but certainly Thursday, because like I said, I might be able to convince myself. I may have convinced myself a way that the Maple Leafs could possibly run it back one more time, Dave. And I'll share my thoughts again on Thursday. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. There was a lot that we planned on getting into that we didn't. My McDavid.
We got a lot to time because the Leafs aren't playing now. Sorry.
You're right. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But I'm curious where Leafs Nation is at when it comes to Connor McDavid and whether or not they're rooting for him or against him in the Cup final. We'll have that discussion tomorrow. And there's buyout candidate talk going on right now too. A couple Maple Leafs could be on the buyout chopping block. We'll get to that later on in the week as well. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcast platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti and follow us on the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow, night one of the Stanley Cup final. We'll preview the Cup final on tomorrow's show. Until then, keep it locked right here on the Locked On Leafs podcast.